Okay, we've started recording, and I'm going to be releasing the recording on the Facebook page afterwards. I might as well get started. All right, thank you everyone for coming. My name is Jin. I'm an international student from Malaysia, and I'm studying mechanical engineering at the University of Waterloo. And thanks for coming to this teach-in about fixing the postgraduate work permit and ensuring status for all. Today, all over Canada, migrant students are protesting for equal treatment and for better post-pandemic treatment, organized as part of the Migrant Students United and the Migrant Rights Network. So at today's teach-in, these are our objectives. Firstly, we're going to learn about the experiences of international students and how they've been systematically disadvantaged. Next, we're going to learn why we need to fix the postgraduate work permit and have status for all. And finally, we're going to go through some actions right here, right now, that we can do to help and advocate to the government for this cause. So first, let's talk about immigration. Why do people come to Canada? For students, we come for a better education, workers come for better working conditions and to exploit their full potential, and refugees come for security. And it's for many of these reasons that people do stay in Canada after graduating. And in fact, immigration is an essential part of Canada's population growth, because 80% of Canada's population growth last year was due to immigration, and it's also helping to keep the workforce fresh in the face of an aging population. So this all sounds great, but how do people become Canadian? Lots of Canadians actually aren't very familiar with the process because they never had to go through it, and migrants don't have voting rights. So the people who are most affected by these policies don't have the power to change them. So what I'm hoping to do is to build empathy and knowledge in the community about what we go through. So there are many, many, many ways to become Canadian, but some of the most relevant ones are the postgraduate work permit, because most students come to Canada and become permanent residents this way. Other ways including having a job offer from a Canadian company, or through temporary foreign worker programs that allow people to come to the country temporarily to work temporarily. So the post-graduation work permit is usually used to fulfill the permanent residency requirements, and we're now going to expand on that. So here are the benefits of immigration. First of all, it's an influx of foreign talent and money to refresh an aging workforce. You're also getting lots of motivated, hardworking individuals who contribute in all kinds of ways to Canadian society, in economics or intellectually, socially, or culturally, and also results in improved diversity of culture and thought, because you're bringing people from abroad who bring in their language and their culture and their different ways of thinking. Now, there's benefits specific to international students that you have here. First of all, you have a workforce of motivated, young, and resilient individuals who have both Canadian education and Canadian work experience. They also desire to work in Canada. Over half of international students last year expressed a desire to stay in Canada permanently. International students also give a lot of economic support by spending on Canadian businesses through paying their taxes and income and through sales taxes, and by paying really high tuition. Migrant students actually contributed $15.5 billion to the Canadian economy in 2016, and this number just continues to grow as the number of migrant students in Canada increases. Finally, in contributions to the workforce, international students speak multiple languages and have multicultural experience by default. But in the process, we also make big sacrifices, including leaving our families, our communities, our countries, and our cultures for years at a time. Because of international tuition, we've vastly increased financial burden, 2 to 3 times or even 4 times as high as domestic students. And this is combined with the fact that the exchange rate is rarely in our favor. There's also the stresses of adaptation, trying to learn a new language, adapting to the Canadian culture, building a support network because a lot of international students come with no one here to help them, and adapting to the weather and all the other different things about Canada. And of course, the stresses of dealing with the immigration system, which I'll explain later, is stacked against us, against our favor. And international students don't have many of the resources and support networks that Canadian students do. We can't just go home on the weekends or have our family help us with moving. Often we're here on our own and we don't have many connections. We go through a lot of the same stresses that domestic students do in university, but with all of these added stresses. But the main point I want to make overall is that with all the contributions we make, all the sacrifices we're willing to make to be here, investing in international students is investing in Canada. It's building up the workforce and keeping the population growth steady. Now, I want to dispel some common myths about international students. Not all international students come from wealth. Some international students do come from wealth, but most of us have made very, very big sacrifices to be here, such as working multiple part-time jobs to support our expenses, or our families saving up for years and years to be able to fund an education abroad, because we believe that an education here in Canada is worth it because it's a world-class education. The next myth is that all international students intend to go back home to work, which is not true. Something like 55% of international students last year expressed a desire to stay here and work permanently. The third myth is probably the worst one of all, that international students don't pay as much in taxes. This is simply untrue. We pay the same income taxes and sales taxes as everyone else. And on top of that, we also spend more on tuition, which often goes to subsidize the tuition of domestic students, which you could argue amounts to exploitation. The fourth is a stereotype that international students don't meet North American standards for the workplace. This is simply not true, since we go through the same education and we have the same work experience as Canadian students do. And often, many international students compete for just very few spots that are reserved for international students in universities. So it's often more difficult to get in as an international student than as a domestic student. In my year for engineering, the admissions rate for international students was 7%, which is comparable to domestic admissions rates for MIT and Stanford. So when you get international students from abroad, you're getting the best of us. Here are some more myths. International students have just as many opportunities as domestic students. This is simply not true. International students are less eligible for many kinds of financial support, scholarships, or even co-op positions or research internships. For example, if you want to do a co-op position at a startup, these are often funded by government funds, which means that only domestic students are eligible for these. So this shuts out many of the job opportunities available to domestic students that international students can't have. This, on top of less financial support, just increases the burdens that we have to carry. Next, there's this xenophobic stereotype that long ethnic names and foreign accents mean less experience or less competency. And this is another systemic barrier that international students need to work with. Finally, there's a bias against companies hiring international students either on internships or after graduation, because the impression is that if they're on the temporary work permit, they are less permanent and they'll be of less use to the company, which makes it even more difficult to find jobs in the economy. Here's a real life case of an international student named Jovandeep Sandhu, who was studying mechanical engineering at a college in Mississauga. He was so burdened by international student tuition fees that he was forced to work a full-time job alongside his studies in order just to support himself. Aside from the impact that he wouldn't be able to focus as much on his education, this actually violated the terms of his study permit of a maximum amount of work of 20 hours per week. He was doing this because he felt he had no choice in order to support his expenses here and his tuition. And in fact, the government of Canada has acknowledged that this limit is arbitrary because during COVID-19, this limit has been lifted to allow migrant students to better support themselves. However, Jovandeep, because it was discovered that he was working too many hours per week, was deported just for working too hard. He was just 10 days away from graduation. All that sacrifice, all that investment gone to waste. Let's talk about the postgraduate work permit, or the PGWP. This is how most international students gain permanent status. The general impression that Canadians have is that the immigration system is very welcoming. And in most cases, it is much more welcoming than alternative immigration systems, such as the US immigration system. However, that doesn't mean that there is no area for improvement. If you're an international student, this is the plan for how you would get permanent status. Firstly, get admitted to a Canadian university. Second, go through the program and graduate. Third, apply for the postgraduate work permit within 180 days of graduation. Next, you have to find a job in Canada and hold it for at least 2 years. This allows you to accrue enough work experience to finally apply for PR. Then you'll be judged based on your skill level and education and some other factors, and you'll be assigned a certain number of points based on how much value you will have to Canada. If you have enough points, your application is accepted and you finally have permanent status. However, there's so many things that could go wrong here. If any one of these steps goes wrong, everything goes to waste. Here are some things that could go wrong. For example, simply not completing university or taking an unscheduled break can mean losing status and getting deported. First of all, the PGWP is contingent on graduation. You must have graduated in order to receive it. And it's only valid for 1 to 3 years after graduation, depending on program length. If the program is too short, it's impossible to accrue enough work experience to get permanent residency. And taking an unscheduled break can disqualify international students or reduce eligible postgraduate work permit length, which makes it even more difficult to get permanent residency. Failing out doesn't just mean losing your future, it means losing all the sacrifices that went into obtaining an international education. University is a really high stakes game for international students. And this is something that a lot of people don't realize. These are more things that could go wrong. After university, if you made it through everything and you graduated, only certain types of work count for work experience towards PR. Part-time work doesn't count. Work done while on the study permit doesn't count, which doesn't make sense because as an engineering student, part of my co-op work experience can be used towards my engineering license, but it cannot be used to satisfy my requirements for immigration status. Why is this? It's completely arbitrary. Less skilled labor doesn't count, even though it might be doing important work. Self-employment doesn't count, such as if you started your own business. So this shows that how difficult it is to gain the experience required for PR. And companies are biased against hiring postgraduate work permit holders because they're perceived as being less permanent because it's only valid for 3 years at most, which makes it even more difficult. Furthermore, if there's poor job availability and you can't get hired, you might not be able to accrue enough work experience in time. There's also a lack of eligibility for certain jobs as a student, such as government-funded positions at startups, as I mentioned earlier, or research because of your temporary status. And scholarships are much more difficult to obtain. So these are just some of the many systemic barriers that stand in the ways of migrant students. Now let's talk about what's called the comprehensive ranking system on the PR application. People hoping to attain permanent status in Canada will be assigned points based on skill level, education level, whether they speak the official languages, how much work experience they have, and whether they have a job offer. Not having enough points means being denied permanent residency and having to be sent back home. And it's especially hard to obtain these points for people who work in less skilled occupations. One conception about immigration we need to change is that we need to start valuing all work. We need to be done with the idea that just because a job or worker is less skilled means that their job or their work is less important or less valuable. Less skilled labor is just as important as skilled labor. The economy will not function without it. For example, manual labor in agriculture and construction, meat packaging plants, cleaning, all of these are essential and so should not be counted as less valuable. This is why we say we should value all work for the postgraduate work permit, not just skilled labor. Now, all of these things are just exacerbated with COVID-19. Now the economy has been wiped out. Contrary to common thought, international students rarely receive economic support from their home governments. Even one international student I know graduated in the top 2% of his class in India, but when he came here to study, he was not given any kind of financial support for his tuition by his home government. And we get absolutely no COVID support at all. We're not eligible for many of the economic supports that domestic students are eligible for. And this is especially egregious for friends of mine who come from Ecuador, because Ecuadorian economy is based on oil. And my Ecuadorian friends, they rely on funding from their home government in order to fund their tuition here. When the oil economy collapsed with COVID-19, so did the income sources of the Ecuadorian government. And now they're having trouble funding the tuition, and they might have to abort their education here. This would be a huge loss to Canada. For those who have left university, who have graduated from university, PGWP holders are finding it much more difficult to find jobs, or they're getting laid off from their jobs, which means that they might not be able to satisfy their PR requirements and are at risk of getting deported. If they become unemployed, or when the PGWP status expires, they lose healthcare. One thing that a lot of people don't know is that those on postgraduate work permits, they must be employed full-time for at least 6 months to be eligible for healthcare. And otherwise, they have no healthcare at all. And this is a crucial gap in the system. That migrants and undocumented people not being eligible for healthcare. This is a public health crisis during one of the greatest public health crises of our generation. We're seeing people at risk of who have invested tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars in tuition and in living expenses get deported. All their sacrifices mean nothing now. And of course, those who are undocumented and those who do less skilled labor are hit the hardest. And this is combined with, all of these factors are combined with the fact that many migrant students are often exposed to xenophobia. I worked on a campaign earlier this year to make international students eligible for the CSP. Because despite facing many of the same expenses, and in fact greater expenses than domestic students do, international students are less available for economic assistance. This is combined with the fact that international students have fewer work opportunities. I've heard from some of my fellow organizers that international graduate students can't TA at some universities, which may be a crucial source of income for them. And unless we act now, international students will continue to be excluded from post-pandemic recovery. Now let's talk about some of the real life experience that we had to go through. Just last year, the University of Waterloo raised the tuition for the computer science program by 62%, from $15,823 to $25,653. Keep in mind that this is not yearly tuition, this is tuition every term. This is $25,600 per term, and it was raised by 62.1%. This would be completely unjustifiable for any other group of students other than migrant students. And it's completely unfair and it's much higher than inflation. For something as simple as wanting to get a car to go to a job, to be able to drive to a job, for example, domestic students can use their parents' insurance to buy a car. International students can't. So that means that they may pay very high insurance rates, as high as $400 per month. Ultimately, what my point is that we don't want special privileges, we don't want handouts, we don't want special aid. We just want to have fairness. We want the same protections and benefits as everybody else, especially in light of the sacrifices we made to be here and continue to make. International students may not be able to vote, but we contribute to Canada in many other ways. We contribute economically by buying from Canadian business, by paying tuition. We contribute culturally through our intellectual property, through our languages, and through our food. Now let's talk about, given all these issues, there's a campaign to fix the postgraduate work permit, to eliminate these structural barriers, and to ensure status for all, and to ensure proper pandemic support. This is a campaign being run by the Migrant Workers Alliance, which is to fix the postgraduate work permit. The specific demands are, number one, make work permits renewable so that it's easier to get the amount of experience you need to gain permanent residency. Number two, value all work to count for PR, not just skilled labor, but including part-time labor and unskilled labor. Since we have seen that all labor is valuable, especially during this pandemic. Number three, lower the comprehensive ranking system score. Require fewer points to qualify for permanent residency so that it's easier and we lower the systemic barriers. Number four, unite families so that we don't have to be separated from them. And finally, ensure status for all. All international students and migrant workers should be given permanent status on landing. Whether they want to stay here or not, it's to ensure consistent and equal benefits and protections. In terms of pandemic support, the demands are migrant students need access to universal health care. Not just conditional health care dependent on studies or work, but health care that's unconditional, regardless of your status, regardless of your national origin. This is especially crucial in this pandemic. Number two, guaranteed comprehensive income support, such as the CESB. As I said before, we face many of the same expenses that domestic students do, or even more, but do not receive support that's commensurate. Number 3, open and extended work permits and permanent status on landing. This is pretty self-explanatory. Number 4, economic support with rent, tuition, bills, and quarantine measures. Because we need the same supports as everyone else, if not more. I want to clarify something about the Status for All campaign. Status for All is not an open border policy. It doesn't mean just letting anybody into the country. Rather, for those who are accepted, give them permanent status on landing. This ensures equal protection and services in terms of healthcare, universal healthcare, ensures equal tuition in education, ensures the same protections in employment, and ensures the same benefits in economic support. Because even if we increase the amount of rights available to migrant students, they are limited in their ability to use these rights if they are here on temporary status, because temporary status allows exploitation by using the fear of deportation. And finally, we want to immigrate this is meant to eliminate the two-tier immigrant system. Some people come here with permanent status on landing, but most of us come here on temporary status, and this just opens the door to all kinds of exploitation in work and in studies. So before we move on to the action, I would like to take questions from the audience if you have any. This is a teach-in, and we encourage everyone to ask questions so that we can learn together. So just type your questions into the chat, and I'll be monitoring them. All right, thanks for coming, Guy. And by the way, this presentation is available on the action package, and I'll just show the link later. Thank you, Quinn. Oh, thank you, Akshar. Thank you for your kind comments. Okay, if there are no questions, we'll move on to the action. So I asked you that you have your phones ready right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to call the Prime Minister's office and call your MP to demand support for this campaign. So what I suggest you do is go to this website. So Joy, could you put a link in the chat? So just take 10 minutes, call Justin Trudeau, your MP. So what you can do is then go to the website, type in your details, and then when you click on the make a call button, it will call your phone and it'll connect you to the Prime Minister's office and to your MP's office, and then you can leave them a voicemail. So I'll be waiting here on standby to provide support in case there are any issues. So just type in the chat when you made the call.
I'm gonna call on with you guys. Okay.
Oh, Joy. Thank you for calling your Member of Parliament and Prime Minister Trudeau to ensure full immigration status for all. Connecting you now with Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada.
The website will display a script that shows you what to say if you're not sure what to say.
Continue on to the next call.
You can just read that off when you call.
Prime Minister's office,
I'm calling for Prime Minister Trudeau.
He's not available, I could put you through to the voicemail of his assistant if you wish to leave a message.
Sure, of course.
One moment. You have reached the voicemail of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister welcomes the views of Canadians on the issues that are important to them. Unfortunately, it is not possible to put you in contact with an official at this time. However, you may wish to leave a message. Please be assured that we will give it our utmost attention. Vous avez joint la boîte vocale du Premier ministre.
You can see the script, right, on the screen?
Obtenir les commentaires des Canadiens et des Canadiens sur les enjeux qui leur sont chers.
Should be on the website.
Malheureusement, il est pour l'instant impossible.
Like just some bullet points you can read out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Vous pouvez cependant laisser un message auquel nous accorderons toute notre attention.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister Trudeau. We are calling on the behalf of Migrant Students Union. We want to ensure full immigration status for all migrant and undocumented people. Migrants coming into the future must come with full immigration status, and we strongly believe that they are a crucial member of our economy and our society. COVID-19 has threatened migrant lives and livelihoods, and without immigration status, migrants can't protect themselves or access emergency supports. Migrants are a part of our community, and they deserve equal rights, decent work, healthcare, and family unity. Full immigration status ensures that. I will be following up to make sure that you do the right thing. Thank you and have a great day.
Now I should be connecting you to your MP.
Yeah. The MP?
Yeah.
Okay.
To stay on the line.
Oh, I kind of cut the call.
I think you hit star to like stop it from recording and move on to the next representative.
Oh, well. I don't know if I should call them back now.
So yeah, once you've left a message for Trudeau, hit star and it will transfer you to your MP.
Oh wait, didn't come up as a link. Let me try that again. Oh no, it's the first one. The first one works fine. I also included a card link in the chat where you'll have like access to like all sorts of resources to stay informed, ways to take action, petitions to sign, links to donate. I also put in a few articles as well, like if you want to read a little more about the situation to find more info. And there's some infographics in there too to keep you guys informed, but in a visual manner, I guess. I hope you enjoyed this webinar.
Okay, great. I think we can just move on to the next item for now. So the next thing to do is to sign petitions to support this cause, especially before September 23, which is the speech from the throne, to show support to the government that this is something that people want. So if you go to, I'm going to put the link in the chat. So if you go to that link that I just put in the chat, it will have a link to this presentation. You can access all these links to sign these petitions. Then next, I'd ask you to follow these accounts on Instagram so that you can keep updated on the issue. And overall, just keep learning about it. So if everyone has access to that, next thing to do is, here's some homework. So first, what you can do is you can write emails to your MP and your MPP to demand support for this cause. I've included a template in the action package that you can access and use for your own purposes. And I've included tools to figure out how to find your MP and MPP. And finally, I ask you to be an active citizen. Talk to your friends and family about fixing the postgraduate work permit and for status for all. Talk about why this is necessary and talk about the experiences of international students that are so frequently ignored. Support international students in your life, reach out to them, ask them if they need any support, because remember, they're here without their families. And finally, vote for politicians and parties who support inclusive and fair immigration and education policies so that we have a better future for everyone, not just domestic students, not just international students, but for everyone in Canada. Thank you everyone for coming to this webinar. Really grateful that you came here to hear me today. And again, all these resources, including this presentation, are available at these links. Thanks.